federal judge!
The night was warm and still, the kind of summer evening that makes a quiet neighborhood feel like it belongs in a painting, and Crestwood Lane and Elmwood Heights was exactly that kind of street-wide, tree-lined, the houses set back behind manicured lawns and old oak trees that had been growing there since before most of the residents were born. Officer Trent Kowalski had already stopped the man. He was circling him the way a dog circles something. It is decided belongs to it slow and deliberate, his flashlight swinging in loose arcs, his chest puffed out with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been told no and believed it. The man he had stopped was 63 years old. He wore a dark polo shirt and a pair of clean khaki trousers and comfortable loafers, and he was standing with both hands raised at shoulder height, calm and still, the way a person stands when they have made the calculation that stillness is the only safe response available to them. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had already told the officer this. He had told him his address, 217 Crestwood Lane, the brick colonial with the white trim and the porch light glowing at the far end of the block less than 50 feet away. He had told him about the wallet left at the restaurant and the phone on his kitchen counter, and he had offered calmly, and without any irritation in his voice, to walk the officer directly to his front door, where his wife Diane could confirm everything. Kowalski's response was to laugh. It was not a small laugh or a nervous laugh. It was the full theatrical kind, performed for the benefit of his partner Officer Danny Ruiz, who was leaning against the patrol car with his personal phone raised and pointed at the scene, recording his own grin spreading wider every time Kowalski said something that struck him as particularly clever. "He says he lives here," Kowalski announced to Ruiz, spreading his arms wide as if presenting evidence to a jury. "A black man in Elmwood Heights at midnight, no wallet, no phone, no ID, and he just lives here." He dragged the last two words out slowly. Each syllable dipped in contempt. "Real convenient story, Grandpa." Marcus kept his hands raised and kept his voice level and kept his eyes on a fixed point just past Kowalski's left shoulder, because 63 years of practice had taught him that direct eye contact with a man like this could be interpreted as aggression, and he had not survived this long by giving men like this the excuse they were looking for. "I understand the confusion," Officer Marcus said quietly and evenly. "I am happy to cooperate fully. The restaurant is Caruso's on Elm 2 blocks north. The owner's name is Frank Battaglia. He has known my wife and me for 15 years. You can call him right now and he will confirm we had dinner there this evening." "Call him Kowalski," repeated, turning back to Ruiz with a look of pure theatrical delight. "He wants me to make phone calls on his behalf. That is rich." He shook his head slowly. "You know what I think? I think maybe you work for somebody around here. Gardener, maybe. Pool maintenance? Something like that. That would explain the neighborhood, wouldn't it?" 180 yards away through the wide bay window of the retirement party she had been attending for the previous 2 hours, Chief Sandra Okafor went completely still. She had been in the middle of a conversation she was only half listening to, holding a glass of sparkling water she had barely touched, when something made her look out the window. Instinct or experience or the particular way her brain had been wired by 26 years on the force to register wrongness even at a distance. What she saw made the glass slip from her fingers. It landed on the carpet but did not break. She did not notice. She was already looking at the face of the man standing with his hands raised under the streetlight at the far end of Crestwood Lane, and she recognized him immediately and completely. She kicked off her heels. She started running, because what Trent Kowalski and Danny Ruiz saw that night was an older black man in a polo shirt with no identification, a convenient story, and nowhere he could possibly belong at this hour in this neighborhood. They saw a target. They saw an easy arrest. They saw the kind of moment that would make good material for the precinct group chat later. What they did not see were 28 years on the federal appeals court. They did not see more than 12,000 cases decided, the opinions cited in law schools from coast to coast. The dissents that became majorities a decade later when the law finally caught up. They did not see the man who had authored the Webb Doctrine, a landmark use of force ruling that rewrote police accountability training across 14 states, the ruling that police unions had fought with everything they had and lost. The ruling that the two officers standing on this sidewalk had been trained under at the academy, the very policies they were violating right now in real time on a man's own street. They did not see the judge who had sent corrupt officers to federal prison and freed innocent men who had been buried so deep in the system that their own families had stopped hoping. They did not see the man who 6 months ago had quietly begun hearing preliminary motions in the largest federal corruption case ever brought against the Carver City Police Department, a case that had not yet become public. A case that 17 officers in this very precinct were desperately hoping would go away. They had stopped the Honorable Marcus Webb, and they were laughing. And the woman sprinting barefoot through the dark had every intention of making sure they found out exactly who that was. The evening had started the way the best evenings do, without any plan at all beyond being present with the person you love most in the world. Marcus and Diane Webb had celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary at Caruso's on Elm, a small Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles, and a kitchen that smelled like someone's grandmother was back there cooking for people she actually cared about. Frank Battaglia, who had owned the place for 27 years and knew the Webbs well enough to know that Marcus always ordered the veal and Diane always said she was going to try something different and always ended up with the linguine, had sent out a complimentary dessert with a candle in it and personally hugged them both on the way out. Diane took the car. Marcus said he wanted to walk just 2 blocks through the warm evening air, the neighborhood quiet and beautiful at this hour. And he wanted 15 minutes of it with no phone and no case files and no emails from clerks about motions that needed responses by morning. He wanted one ordinary evening. That was the full extent of what he had asked the universe for tonight. His wallet was sitting on the table at Caruso's right now, tucked beside the bread basket in the small leather fold where Frank's hostess had found it 20 minutes after the Webbs left and set it safely behind the bar. His phone was on the kitchen counter at home, screen down where he had deliberately left it. He was wearing the loafers Diane had bought him 4 birthdays ago that he refused to replace because they had shaped themselves perfectly to his feet, and the polo shirt his daughter Keisha had given him last Father's Day, dark green, his favorite color. He was 50 feet from his own front door, 50 feet from the decaf coffee Diane had probably already put on, 50 feet from the framed drawings his grandchildren had made him that hung on the refrigerator alongside 35 years of photographs and notes and the accumulated texture of a life well lived. 28 years on the federal appeals court, more than 12,000 cases. The Webb Doctrine, argued before the court by a coalition of civil rights organizations in 2018, decided in a 4-3 ruling that took Marcus 6 months to write and that he would argue privately was the most important work of his career. A ruling that established clear constitutional limits on police use of force and mandated comprehensive retraining programs across every department in 14 states. A ruling that police unions had called activist and dangerous, and had spent 4 years attempting to overturn in the legislature and failed every single time. 6 months ago, quietly and without any public announcement, Marcus had accepted assignment to a preliminary hearing in United States versus Carver City Police Department, a massive federal corruption case involving a rogue narcotics unit, evidence planting illegal searches, and years of protected misconduct that went all the way up the chain of command. The case had not yet been unsealed. The officers involved did not yet know who was sitting on it. He was 2 blocks from the restaurant. He was 50 feet from his front door. He had his hands raised on his own street, and a young officer was calling him Grandpa. Trent Kowalski had been on the force for 16 months, and in those 16 months, he had managed to do very little of any distinction, except accumulate 3 excessive force complaints that had been quietly processed through the police union's grievance system, and filed away somewhere they would never inconvenience anyone. He had grown up in Millhaven, a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes from Elmwood Heights, and he had spent his entire life developing a very specific and unexamined theory about how the world worked. which was that certain neighborhoods belonged to certain kinds of people, and that the primary function of law enforcement was to enforce that arrangement. He had never articulated this theory out loud because he was not entirely stupid, but it was present in everything he did from the moment he put on the uniform, in which cars he ran plates on and which ones he waved through, in which pedestrians he slowed down for, and which ones he accelerated past, in the way his hand drifted toward his belt the moment certain people came into view and stayed loose and relaxed when others walked by. He was not a complicated man. He had a simple understanding of authority, that it was something you demonstrated through physical dominance and vocal volume, and the willingness to make other people feel small. And he had found in 16 months of policing that this approach worked almost all of the time, because most people, when confronted with a badge and a flashlight and a voice that is looking for a reason, simply deflate and comply and give you whatever you want. He had never once encountered a man like Marcus Webb. He did not know that yet. His partner, Danny Ruiz, was 23 years old and 9 months out of the academy, and he was not at his core a cruel person, but he was the kind of young man who mistakes belonging for agreement, and in Kowalski's cruiser agreement was the currency of belonging. He had been recording the stop on his personal phone almost from the moment they pulled up, and the part of him that still had some vestige of the person he was before the academy watched the footage through that lens and felt a quiet unease he was not yet brave enough to act on. Both of them had completed their use of force recertification 6 months ago, retrained under the updated protocols mandated by the Webb Doctrine. They had sat in a classroom and been told about constitutional limits and documented compliance and the requirement to de-escalate. They had passed the written exam. They were violating every single provision of it right now. Sandra Okafor had 26 years on the force and a scar on her left forearm from a foot pursuit in her 3rd year and a chief's badge she had earned by surviving every attempt this department had ever made to push her out of it. She was the first black female chief in Carver City history, and she had gotten there the hard way, which is to say, she had gotten there the only way available to her by being better than everyone who wanted her gone at every single rank, by testifying truthfully in a civil rights case 14 years ago, when her own department tried to bury it and her own colleagues threatened her career to her face by holding on through the years, when holding on felt like the least reasonable option available. One federal judge had believed her in that courtroom 14 years ago. One judge had seen through the intimidation and the coordinated lies and had ruled in her favor, and in doing so had made it possible for Sandra Okafor to become everything she subsequently became. That judge's name was Marcus Webb. Her feet were already bleeding where the pavement had found the soft arch of her right foot. She did not feel it. Her dress hem had torn somewhere in the first 30 yards and was catching with every stride. She did not care. She had 180 yards to cover, and the patrol car was already there, and Marcus was already standing with his hands raised, and there was no version of this evening where she slowed down. The particular quality of the air on Crestwood Lane at that hour was something Marcus had noticed 1,000 times before and never once taken for granted: the jasmine from Eleanor Hargrove's front garden drifting across the sidewalk, the distant rhythmic click of the Patterson's sprinkler system, 3 houses down the cooling engine tick of somebody's car in a driveway, the way the streetlights caught the undersides of the oak leaves and made them look like they were lit from within. He had been walking home through this precise sequence of sounds and smells for 26 years, and it had never once felt threatening because he was home, and these were his streets, and this neighborhood knew him the way a neighborhood knows the people who have made it theirs through time and presence and investment and love. The flashlight hit him directly in the eyes before he had even fully registered the patrol car pulling to the curb. And for a fraction of a second the world went white and formless, and he stopped walking and raised his hands, because 63 years of accumulated experience told him that this was the only safe first response available to him, regardless of where he was, or who he was, or what he had spent his life doing. "Evening officers," he said, and his voice was the voice he used on the bench, measured quiet, carrying authority. without performing it the voice of a man who has spent decades listening before he speaks and has learned that the quality of your stillness communicates more than most of what you say. Kowalski's response was to leave the flashlight trained directly on Marcus's face and circle left, moving slowly, taking his time, making sure that everyone watching, including Ruiz, who had already positioned himself near the cruiser with his phone out, understood that he was the one directing this scene. Marcus went through the full account calmly and without embellishment. His name, his address, the anniversary dinner at Caruso's, the wallet on the table, the phone on the kitchen counter at home, the offer to walk directly to his front door 50 feet away, where Diane could confirm every detail in under 30 seconds. He said all of this without a single crack in his composure, without a single note of resentment or fear in his voice, because he had been here before. Not on this exact street, not with these exact officers, but in the general architecture of this situation, which was as familiar to him as the back of his own hand. Every black man in America knew this architecture. The sudden stop, the flashlight in the face, the quick calculation that runs through your body before your brain has fully caught up. How still do I need to be right now? How careful, how perfectly calibrated to avoid giving this man the excuse he is already looking for. Kowalski looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Ruiz with the expression of someone who has just been handed a gift. He says he lives here, he said, drawing it out, performing it, making sure Ruiz was getting all of this. 2 blocks from the fanciest restaurant in the neighborhood. No wallet, no phone, no ID. Just happens to live on Crestwood Lane. He clicked his tongue. You do landscaping for somebody around here? Pool maintenance, something like that? Ruiz laughed and kept recording. The first porch light came on across the street. The Delacroix house, whose owners had been on Crestwood Lane for 11 years and knew Marcus well enough to wave every morning when they got their papers. Then the Pattersons' light. Then the Nguyens one house down. The sound of Kowalski's voice carrying down the quiet street had done what raised voices always do in a neighborhood like this, which is draw people to their windows and their porches to understand what has disturbed the peace. Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, who was 76 years old and had lived at 219 Crestwood Lane for 22 years, who had attended the Webbs' 30th anniversary party in their backyard and had Sunday dinners with Marcus and Diane 4 or 5 times a year, who had watched their daughter Keisha grow from a teenager into a federal prosecutor, and their son Darius become a civil rights attorney who had argued 3 cases before the court. His father sat on Eleanor Hargrove, stepped onto her porch, and understood exactly what she was looking at within the first 3 seconds. Her instinct, immediate and powerful, was to march across the lawn and announce his title loudly enough for everyone on the block to hear, to say that is Federal Judge Marcus Webb. You absolute fools! That is the man who changed the law in 14 states. Take those hands off him right now, and the version of Eleanor who was 30 years younger might have done exactly that. But 76 years of watching the world had taught her something very specific about men like Kowalski, which was that publicly challenging their pride did not deflate them. It inflamed them, and that a man whose pride is on fire in front of an audience will escalate to prove that he is still in control, and that escalation in this context could cost Marcus something she was not willing to let it cost him. So she did something smarter. She raised her phone slowly and deliberately, making certain that both Kowalski and Ruiz could see the red recording light in the darkness of her porch, and she stood perfectly still and let them know they were being watched, and she waited. Because through the corner of her eye at the far end of Crestwood Lane, she could see a figure moving toward them at a dead sprint. Bare feet, she thought, and something torn at the hem, and the figure was moving with the focused, purposeful velocity of someone who had somewhere extremely important to be in the next 60 seconds. She just needed 30 more seconds. She would find a way to get them. Kowalski moved into Marcus's personal space, the way a man moves when he has decided that proximity is a form of power, slowly, deliberately closing the distance until he was close enough that Marcus could smell the coffee on his breath and read the expression in his eyes, which was not anger exactly, but something colder and more settled, something that had been there long before this stop and would be there long after it. Marcus held his ground without moving toward or away, because moving away would be interpreted as guilt and moving toward would be interpreted as threat. And so he simply stood and let Kowalski fill the space between them and held his own gaze steady and his breathing even and his hands visible and still. "You know what I think," Kowalski said, and his voice had dropped from its performing volume to something lower and more deliberate, angled, so that only Marcus could hear it clearly, except that his body camera was pinned to his chest, and its microphone was recording every syllable with crystalline clarity, and Trent Kowalski did not know this yet in any way that mattered to him in this moment. "I think the problem is that you people have gotten very good at telling a convincing story. The right address, the right restaurant name, the right everything. Very polished." He tilted his head slightly. "But you're still standing on a sidewalk in Elmwood Heights at midnight with no ID, and that tells me everything I actually need to know." He leaned slightly closer. "Men who look like you," he said very quietly, "don't live on streets like this. Not at midnight, not at noon, not ever. You want to know why this neighborhood is what it is? Because it stays that way, because of people like me. That's the job, keeping things where they belong." There was a word in there between those sentences, not quite spoken, more exhaled, half swallowed, but completely audible, a word that landed in the air between them, like something physical, the kind of word that carries the full, accumulated weight of a very long American history, and does not land lightly on anyone who hears it. Inside Marcus Webb's chest, something cold and absolute moved through him. Not fear and not exactly anger, though anger was present, refined, and controlled, a blade rather than a fire. He thought in the space of a single breath about the men who had stood in holding cells after stops like this one and had no one coming for them, no neighbor on the porch with a phone, no chief of police who recognized their face. Men who had been processed and charged and absorbed into a machine that chewed through their lives without ever learning their names. He had read their transcripts. He had written opinions about their cases. He knew their stories better than almost anyone. He held perfectly still. And then he said one thing very quietly, without raising his voice or breaking his composure, looking directly into Kowalski's eyes for the first time. "Officer, I need you to hold this moment clearly in your memory, exactly as it is right now, because the way this evening ends is going to depend entirely on whether you remember it accurately." Kowalski stared at him for a beat, and then a slow smile spread across his face, confident, contemptuous, entirely certain of itself. "Oh, I'll remember it," he said. "Trust me, old man, I'm going to be telling this story for years." He had no idea that every word he had just spoken in a near whisper to a man he considered powerless was captured perfectly on the device pinned to his own chest. No idea that this moment would in fact be remembered in courtrooms, in news broadcasts, in policy documents in the academy curriculum that would be revised within 6 months of this night. No idea that the story he planned to tell was not the one that was actually being written right now on Crestwood Lane. No idea that 90 yards away, something was getting closer with every second. Kowalski reached for his radio with the air of a man who is wrapping something up rather than beginning something, which was itself a kind of answer to the question of what he actually believed he was doing here. "Unit 44, this is Officer Kowalski," he said, his voice returning to its broadcast register. "I've got a suspicious individual on the 200 block of Crestwood Lane. Black male, mid-60s, no identification, refusing to cooperate with lawful orders. Requesting a unit for transport. Refusing to cooperate." The phrase went into the radio, into the dispatch log, into the official record of the Carver City Police Department. Marcus Webb had answered every single question Kowalski had asked him calmly and completely, and had offered additional information and verification, and those 3 words now existed in the system as if they were true. "I have not refused anything," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady and clear enough for the body camera to capture it. "I have answered every question you've asked. I've provided my name and my address, and I have offered multiple means of verification. I am standing here with my hands raised on a public sidewalk 50 feet from my front door." The pat-down began without a word of explanation. Hands moving through his pockets along his waistband, down his legs, taking far longer than any policy allowed and far more invasive than any justified stop required. No weapon, no contraband, no wallet, no phone, nothing that wasn't exactly where Marcus had said everything was. Nothing Kowalski announced to Ruiz rather than to Marcus with a tone that managed to make the absence of evidence sound like its own kind of evidence. Then he stepped back and looked at Ruiz, and something passed between them. A decision made without words, and Ruiz pulled out his personal phone and switched to the front camera. What happened next took less than 30 seconds and would be seen by 50 million people within 48 hours. Kowalski moved to Marcus's right side and put his arm around his shoulders, casual, almost companionable, like two old friends posing for a barbecue photo, and tilted his head toward the camera with a wide, easy grin. Ruiz held the phone out, and the flash detonated white against the dark street. Marcus did not close his eyes and did not look away from the camera, and his expression in that photograph was not the expression of a man who had been defeated or broken or diminished. It was the expression of a man who is watching something happen with full understanding of what it is and full confidence in what it will ultimately mean. And if you looked at that photograph carefully, and many millions of people would, you could see in his eyes something that was not quite defiance and not quite patience, but lived somewhere in the still and certain space between them. He was thinking about the men who had no one coming. He was thinking, let the world see exactly what this looks like. Kowalski captioned the photo, caught this one claiming to live in Elmwood Heights, another night's work done, and sent it to the precinct group chat. And the responses began arriving almost immediately. Small explosions of laughter and agreement from men whose names would within 36 hours be part of a federal investigation. The handcuffs went on next. The click of metal against Marcus Webb's wrists was a sound that his wife would hear in her sleep for months afterward. The cuffs were applied tighter than any protocol allowed, tight enough that the skin underneath was already reddening, and the red marks would still be visible 4 hours later when Internal Affairs photographed them as evidence. Marcus said nothing. He had said everything that needed to be said. They walked him toward the patrol car, Kowalski's hand on his arm. Eleanor Hargrove moved across her lawn at a pace that belied her 76 years. Because some situations do not allow for the kind of measured, deliberate movement that age generally requires, and this was very clearly one of them. She planted herself between Kowalski and the open rear door of the patrol car with the complete physical authority of a woman who had, over the course of her life, chaired the boards of 4 different nonprofits, hosted the governor in her dining room on 2 separate occasions, and survived losing a husband to cancer while simultaneously running a successful architectural firm. Which is to say, a woman who had never once in her adult life been made to feel that she did not belong exactly where she was standing. "I need your badge number," she said, looking directly at Kowalski. "Both of you badge numbers right now and the contact information for your supervising officer." Kowalski stared at her with the particular irritation of a man who has been interrupted mid-performance. "Ma'am, this is an active police situation. I'm going to need you to step back." "I am not going anywhere," Eleanor said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has said things like that before and meant them on every occasion. "That man is my neighbor. I have known him for 22 years. His name is Marcus Webb, and he lives in that house right there." She pointed directly and specifically at the brick colonial 50 feet away, the porch light still burning, "and whatever you think you are doing right now, I promise you are making the worst mistake of your professional lives. Lady, I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything I need to know. Badge number. Now. I am recording this interaction, and I will be filing a formal complaint before this night is over, and I want your badge number on that recording." Kowalski looked at her with an expression of undisguised contempt. "Ryan, deal with her," he said to Ruiz, which was the name he used when he was irritated enough to forget that his partner's name was Danny. "Do not address me as her," Eleanor said, stepping slightly to her left to block Ruiz's approach, her phone held high and steady, the red light visible to anyone watching. "And do not take another step toward that car until you have given me your badge number. 60 yards down the street." 50. The figure was close enough now that Eleanor could see the torn hem of a dress and the pale soles of bare feet hitting the pavement, and the kind of full-body forward lean that means someone is running on reserves they did not know they had. She raised her voice just slightly and kept talking. Demanded supervisor. Contact information, referenced her attorney, mentioned the recording again, buying seconds with words the way you buy time when you know that time is the only currency that matters right now. 40 yards? 30. Come on, Eleanor thought. 20 more seconds. Just give me 20 more seconds. 60 yards, and Sandra Okafor's right heel found something sharp, glass maybe, or a raised edge of cracked pavement, and the pain arrived like a bolt of white electricity, and she absorbed it completely and did not break stride. 50 yards. The patrol car was right there. She could read the unit number on the door, and the rear door was open, and Marcus was being walked toward it, and Kowalski's hand was on his arm, and there were maybe 4 seconds between this moment and the moment Marcus disappeared inside that car. 40 yards, and her lungs were completely empty, in the way that lungs get empty when you have been running on adrenaline and fury for 180 yards in bare feet on a warm night, and your body has stopped asking permission and is simply running on the instruction you gave it 2 minutes ago when you saw a man you owed everything to standing with his hands raised on his own street. She thought about the courtroom 14 years ago. She thought about the way her hands had shaken on the Bible while the union lawyer stared at her from the defense table, trying to make her feel small enough to recant. She thought about the single moment when she had looked up from the witness stand and met the eyes of the judge on the bench, calm, attentive, fully present, and had understood in that look that someone in the room was actually going to listen to the truth. 30 yards. Marcus's head was bending toward the doorframe. Kowalski's hand pressed against the back of his neck. 20 yards, and Sandra Okafor had nothing left in her legs and nothing left in her lungs, and she reached down past both of those things and found something older and deeper and more fundamental, which was the reason she had become a police officer. In the first place, the reason she had stayed when staying was the hardest possible choice. The reason she was running barefoot through the dark on a warm summer night, bleeding on her neighbor's sidewalk. 10 yards. She opened her mouth, and everything 26 years, every rank, every fight, every night, she chose the truth over the easier thing, came out at once. "Stop, that's a federal judge." The sound detonated across Crestwood Lane the way sounds only do when every molecule of a person's authority and history and fury has been compressed into 6 syllables and released without restraint. It was not a shout. It was a physical event. Windows rattled in their frames, 3 houses in either direction. A car alarm triggered on the next block. Every dog on the street began barking simultaneously. Every porch light that was not already on flicked on within 2 seconds. Kowalski's hand dropped from Marcus's neck as if the contact had burned him pure instinct, the animal part of the brain responding to the sound of absolute authority before the thinking part had even begun to process what it had heard. Marcus straightened, stepped back from the open door. Slowly, deliberately, with his shoulders square and his head up, the way a person moves when they have decided that the only response available to indignity is an even more complete version of the dignity that indignity was attempting to remove. Ruiz's personal phone slipped from his fingers and hit the pavement, and the screen cracked from corner to corner. He did not move to pick it up. He did not appear to notice it had fallen. Neither officer spoke. Neither moved. Neither appeared to be entirely certain that they were still breathing. Sandra Okafor stood 15 feet away on a well-lit suburban sidewalk in a dress that was torn at the hem and ruined at the knees, her feet leaving faint red marks on the pale concrete with every step she took forward, her chest heaving with each breath in a way she could not control and did not try to, and her voice was absolute steel. "That man," she said, and each word landed with the full weight of everything behind it, is Judge Marcus Webb, Federal Appeals Court. 28 years on the bench, over 12,000 cases decided. Kowalski's face went through three things in rapid and visible succession: confusion, first genuine, and total. The look of a man whose operating framework has just been presented with information it has no category for. Then the attempt to recalibrate the mental scramble towards some version of this situation that still makes sense from inside his worldview. Then finally the collapse, not dramatic, not sudden, but complete, the slow failure of every assumption he had walked onto this sidewalk with visible in the color draining from his face and the way his legs shifted beneath him as if they were deciding whether they still had a job to do. Ruiz was crying, actually crying with tears on his face, and a sound coming out of him that was too broken to be called a word. Something between a prayer and the noise a person makes when they understand for the first time and too late the full magnitude of what they have done. Sandra walked past both of them, did not look at them, did not acknowledge them, walked directly to Marcus Webb and stopped, and for a moment, just a moment, the iron in her voice gave way to something that had been waiting behind it since she looked through that window 180 yards ago and started running. "Your Honor," she said, "I am so sorry." He looked at her. His wrists bore the marks of handcuffs applied too tightly by hands that were too confident, and his polo shirt was slightly disheveled from the pat-down, and none of it had touched the thing underneath the 28 years of composure. The particular stillness of a man who has spent his entire life deciding what the law means and what people deserve, and how a society holds itself together when the people charged with enforcing it forget what it's for. "Chief Okafor," he said, and his voice was exactly what it always was. "You have nothing to apologize for. I should have been faster. You were exactly fast enough." He glanced briefly at the open rear door of the patrol car behind her. "One more second, and I would have been inside that vehicle. Driven to a station I have visited dozens of times as a visitor, processed and photographed and printed like a common criminal." He paused, and something moved through his eyes that was not bitterness exactly, but the clear-eyed recognition of what had almost happened. "You stopped that. That is what matters." "Thank you." She nodded, and the weight of it did not lift. These were her officers, her department, her responsibility, the culture she had been fighting to change and had apparently not changed fast enough, but she turned back toward Kowalski and Ruiz, and her voice became something that could cut through concrete. "I was 150 yards away," Sandra said, addressing both officers in the carrying voice she used when she needed everyone in a room to understand that what was happening was not a conversation. "I heard your radio transmission, refusing to cooperate. I watched Judge Webb tell you his name, his address, his restaurant, his wife's name, and offer to walk you to his front door. I watched you conduct a pat-down that violated 4 department protocols. I watched you take a photograph with a handcuffed man and send it to the department group chat." She took one step closer to Kowalski. "Your body camera was recording. Every word you whispered into that man's ear. Every syllable. Internal Affairs is going to hear it before midnight, and when they do, I want you to think very carefully about the words you chose to use on a sidewalk where you believed no one of consequence was listening." Kowalski's knees moved beneath him, a small involuntary shift, his hand finding the patrol car again, the same patrol car he had used as a prop for a photograph 60 seconds ago. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ruiz had stopped crying in the way that people stop crying when the enormity of something grows large enough to replace the emotion with something closer to shock. Who Kowalski managed finally. "Who are you?" Sandra reached into the pocket of her torn dress and produced her badge. Gold, heavy, the city seal catching the light of the street lamps she had run past at full speed 8 minutes ago and held it where both officers could see it clearly. "I am Chief Sandra Okafor," she said. "I am your boss's boss's boss." The silence that followed was of the specific and particular kind that occurs after the last move of a chess game, when all the pieces are exactly where they are and everyone can see the board clearly, and there is nothing left to debate about what the outcome is. "Badges," she said. "Weapons. On the hood of the car. Right now." Kowalski's hands were shaking badly enough that the badge made a sound against his fingers before he managed to set it down. The service weapon followed. Ruiz placed his beside them, and for a moment the four objects sat on the hood of the patrol car in the warm summer air. 2 badges, 2 guns, 4 items that represented everything 2 young men had worked for and everything they had just destroyed in 15 minutes of casual, comfortable cruelty. You are both suspended without pay, effective this moment. You will surrender your department IDs before you leave this street. You will not speak to anyone about this incident. You will not contact Judge Webb or any member of his family. You will not return to the station without explicit authorization from my office. She looked at them, each in turn. Is that understood? Yes, Chief. Kowalski's voice was barely audible. Ruiz nodded, which was the best he could manage. She held their gaze for a long moment, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with the particular expression of someone who is looking at a consequence and naming it clearly. You had every opportunity to do the right thing tonight, she said. Every single one. He was calm. He was cooperative. He was respectful. He told you the truth from the very first word. She paused. And you chose this. She stepped back. Get out of my sight. Go home and wait for the call from Internal Affairs. The street watched them go. Eleanor Hargrove lowered her phone on her porch at 219 Crestwood Lane after 9 minutes and 14 seconds of continuous unbroken wide-angle video that captured everything from the moment Marcus raised his hands to the moment Kowalski set his badge on the hood of the patrol car with clear audio throughout, and the particular gift of capturing Kowalski's face when Sandra announced her rank. She had been recording since before Sandra started running. Sandra pulled out her phone and dialed the direct line for the Internal Affairs Division commander, a number she had never called quite like this, and when the call connected, she gave the address, gave the names, gave the charges, and then said the 4 words that turned a standard I-A call into something else entirely. The victim is a federal judge. The silence on the other end lasted approximately 2 seconds, which for a Department Internal Affairs line at 11:30 on a Wednesday night was remarkable. Then, we're sending everyone. 20 minutes. They arrived in 27. Not one investigator, a full team. 6 people, 2 supervisors, the department's most senior IA personnel, all of whom understood before they arrived that the footage from this stop was going to be seen by the entire country within hours, and that everything they did in the next 12 hours was going to be reviewed at a level the Carver City PD had never experienced before. Body cameras were bagged and sealed. Ruiz's personal phone was collected under subpoena. Eleanor Hargrove's footage was requested and provided willingly immediately, with Eleanor standing on her porch describing exactly where she had been standing and what she had been able to see and hear throughout. Marcus Webb sat on his own porch, at last finally home, finally on the right side of his own front door. Diane sat next to him with her hand in his and did not let go of it, and she looked at the red marks on his wrists with an expression that said everything she could not find words for. Their son Darius arrived from the city 40 minutes later, having driven faster than he should have, and embraced his father for a long time without speaking, and Marcus held him back and said quietly that he was all right and that everything was going to be fine, and meant it. Inside the mobile command unit on Crestwood Lane, the evidence assembled itself with the methodical, inexorable logic of a tide coming in. The lead IA investigator, Lieutenant Carol Brennan, no relation, had been with Internal Affairs for 11 years and had reviewed hundreds of body camera incidents, and she watched Kowalski's footage from beginning to end without stopping except once when she reached the whispered section and replayed it 3 times to make sure she was hearing it correctly. Then she sat back and looked at her team and said, "That is not a misconduct case. That is a federal civil rights violation captured in its entirety on the officer's own camera." The group chat on Ruiz's phone was unlocked within minutes. The selfie was there already, with responses from other officers. Laughter, agreement, encouragement, the tone of men who had done this before and expected no consequence. The investigator scrolled back through the history and stopped scrolling after 4 minutes. because what was in there was not a single incident, but a pattern spanning months. Other stops, other photographs, other black men photographed in handcuffs and shared as entertainment, and 17 different officers participating in the conversation with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and not a single note of objection from any of them. The paper trail confirmed Marcus's account in every particular, the receipt from Caruso's, the property tax records going back 26 years, the home security footage showing Marcus leaving for dinner at 7:45 and his phone sitting exactly where he said it was. Frank Battaglia's immediate call to the precinct when he heard what had happened, the wallet sitting behind the bar at Caruso's exactly where his hostess had found it. Everything Marcus Webb had said was true. Everything Kowalski had transmitted to dispatch was a lie. By midnight, someone had leaked the basic facts to a news outlet. By 4 a.m., the selfie was everywhere. By 6 a.m., the national networks had it. By noon the following day, it had been seen by more people than Sandra Okafor could bring herself to count. Sandra stood at the podium the next morning at 10 o'clock with the American flag behind her and the city seal at her left, and the full weight of what had happened on Crestwood Lane pressing down on every word she was about to say, and she did not flinch from any of it. She did not call it an isolated incident. She named it as a symptom of a deeper and longer failure, a culture of contempt that had been allowed to calcify in this department over years, protected by silence and union paperwork and the comfortable assumption that the people being mistreated had no recourse. And she said directly into the cameras that it ended now on this day, under her watch, no exceptions. Trent Kowalski and Danny Ruiz were terminated from the Carver City Police Department effective immediately. Both faced charges of assault, false imprisonment, filing a false police report, and federal civil rights violations. The case had been formally referred to the United States Department of Justice for additional federal charges. 17 additional officers were suspended with pay pending full investigation of the group chat, and Sandra made clear that the investigation would go wherever the evidence took it, regardless of rank or tenure. Darius Webb filed the federal civil lawsuit 3 days later. He stood on the courthouse steps with the selfie in his hand and his father's stillness in his bearing, and he said what needed to be said in 2 sentences. This lawsuit is about what happens to the next man who walks home alone at night, and it is about making sure that man makes it to his front door. The courtroom that received the filing was federal. The judge assigned to oversee it was not Marcus Webb. 2 weeks after the stop on Crestwood Lane, Trent Kowalski and Danny Ruiz sat at the defense table in a courtroom they had visited dozens of times from the other side. They wore suits instead of uniforms, and their wrists were free, but neither of them looked like men whose futures were anything other than decided. Kowalski kept his eyes on the table. Ruiz kept his hands flat on his thighs in the manner of someone working very hard to maintain the outward appearance of composure. The judge presiding over the arraignment was the Honorable Patricia Osei, who had been assigned by random lottery, and who was, as it happened, a colleague of Marcus Webb's who had shared a bench with him at 3 judicial conferences and known him for 20 years. She had watched the body camera footage before the hearing began, so as she noted to Kowalski's attorney when he began his standard opening, had the entire world. Kowalski's attorney attempted the phrasing that defense attorneys always attempt in cases like this. Your Honor, my client was following standard procedure for a suspicious judge. Osei looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has heard a great many things in a great many courtrooms and has very limited patience for this particular one. Counselor, she said, what procedure includes taking selfies with a restrained civilian? What procedure includes sending that photograph to a group chat while the man is still in handcuffs? What procedure includes the statements your client made clearly and on camera about where certain people are and are not permitted to live? She set the papers down. Save your arguments for trial. Bail is set at $250,000 each. Outside the courthouse, Kowalski walked into the afternoon sunlight without his badge and without his uniform, and with nothing at all of the swagger that had carried him down the sidewalks of Elmwood Heights 16 months ago. He was 26 years old, and his career was over, and his name had become a case study in what happens when contempt disguises itself as authority and mistakes someone else's patience for weakness. The community center on Ferris Avenue held 400 people when it was full, and on the night of the town hall it held 612, and there were another 140 standing outside who watched through the propped open doors, and the line to get in had started forming before noon. Marcus Webb took the stage at 7:30, and the room fell into a silence that was not the silence of waiting, but the silence of attention. The kind of attention that a room gives to a person who has earned it through something more than just a microphone and a podium. He stood for a moment before he spoke, looked at the faces in the room, young and old people who had driven from neighborhoods far from Elmwood Heights, people who had brought their children and their elderly parents, people who had printed signs, and people who had come with nothing but themselves and the thing they were carrying inside them that had brought them here tonight. I have been asked many times in the past 4 weeks, he said, what I want from all of this. He let the silence rest for a moment before continuing. I do not want revenge. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't want those 2 young men destroyed, even though they very nearly destroyed something in me that I had spent 63 years building. He paused. What I want is something very simple. I want the next 63-year-old black man walking home from his anniversary dinner to make it to his front door, unmolested, unquestioned, safely. I want the next officer who sees him to pause for 1 second and see a neighbor, a father, a grandfather, a human being who belongs exactly where he is. A woman in the 3rd row began crying before he finished the sentence. She was not the only one. I want the badge to mean what it was always supposed to mean, he said. Nothing more, nothing less. The standing ovation lasted longer than anyone planned for, and after it was over, the moderator had to wait for the room to settle before the program could continue, and Marcus stood at the podium through all of it with his hands folded and his head slightly bowed, absorbing it the way a man absorbs something he is grateful for and not entirely sure he deserves. 6 months after the night on Crestwood Lane, Marcus Webb walked home from Caruso's alone in the warm evening air, and he did not tell Diane he was doing it. And the reason he did not tell her was that he needed to find out whether he could still do it without the thing that had been sitting in his body since that night, the particular tension that lived now in his shoulders and his stomach whenever he passed a patrol car, the involuntary inventory he took of his pockets. Every time he left the house, the new awareness of himself as a visible person in a space which was an old awareness resurfaced and made sharper by one night on a sidewalk 50 feet from his own front door. The jasmine was out again in Eleanor Hargrove's garden. The Patterson sprinkler clicked its familiar rhythm 3 houses down. The oak trees held the street light the same way they always had. And the air had that particular summer evening quality that Crestwood Lane seemed to manufacture specifically for the benefit of people who needed reminding that the world was mostly gentle. He was halfway down the block when the patrol car slowed alongside him. His body tensed before his mind did the old calculation, automatic and immediate, assessing the space between him and the nearest curb and the position of his hands, and whether his posture communicated the precise calibration of non-threat that the situation might require. And then the window rolled down, and a young woman leaned out and smiled. She was a new officer, early 20s, with the earnest expression of someone who has not yet learned to replace the genuine version of themselves with a professional version, which in Sandra Okafor's department was increasingly understood to be an asset rather than a liability. "Good evening, Judge Webb," she said, and her tone was easy and warm and completely direct. "I'm Officer Brianna Cole. I just wanted to say, I hope you're having a good walk." He blinked. "You know who I am." "Everyone does, sir. Your case was in our first week of training. We watched the footage. We spent 3 days on it." She seemed to understand that there might be something complicated about saying this, and she chose her next words carefully. I wanted to say thank you for how you handled it, what you showed people about what patience looks like, what dignity looks like. When the system fails you." Marcus looked at her for a moment. The genuine face, the 5 months of experience she carried, with a combination of care and uncertainty that was exactly the right combination for someone who was just starting to understand what the work actually required. "How long have you been on the force, Officer Cole?" "5 months, sir." "5 months." He nodded. "You've got a long career in front of you. A lot of nights on a lot of streets, a lot of decisions to make in the dark when nobody is watching, and the easy thing and the right thing are not the same thing." She listened without interrupting, which was itself a quality worth noting. "The badge gives you authority over people's lives," he said. "Real authority. Use it the way you would want it used on someone you love." She held that for a moment and then she nodded. Not the quick nod of polite acknowledgement, but the slower kind that means someone is actually putting something into memory where it will stay. "I will, sir," she said. "I promise." She drove away slowly and Marcus watched the taillights until they turned at the far end of the block, and then he kept walking, and his shoulders were loose, and his hands were easy at his sides, and the tension that had been living in his body since that night had for the first time in 6 months gone somewhere else. His front door appeared. The brick colonial with the white trim. The porch light Diane always left on, which was the light he had been walking toward when everything happened, which was the light that had been burning steadily 50 feet away, while 2 men who had no idea who he was decided that he did not belong in front of it. He climbed the steps and put his key in the door. Diane was on the porch. She had the rocking chair pulled slightly forward, which was the position it got into when she had been sitting in it for a while, watching the street, without looking like she was watching the street, which she had been doing every night since it happened, not telling him because she did not want him to feel watched, and not being able to stop because she was his wife and she loved him, and the night he came home with red marks on his wrists had done something to her that she was still working through 6 months later. She looked up when she heard his step on the walk, and the expression on her face cycled through relief and love and a complicated kind of pride in a single second. He came up the steps and kissed her and sat down beside her on the second chair, and through the screen door behind them the television was murmuring. The news anchor was saying something about the Webb Protocol, the state-mandated training program named for the case officially adopted across all 47 departments in the state tonight, the largest reform package in the state's policing history, signed into law that afternoon. "Good walk?" Diane asked. "Good walk," he said. And then a young officer stopped to say hello. "Brianna Cole, 5 months on the force." He paused. She'd studied the case at the academy. She knew who I was. She thanked me. Diane watched his face while he said this. She had learned over 35 years how to read what his face was doing when he was deciding whether something was going to be all right. "She'll be a good officer," he said. "I think so." Diane took his hand, the same hand, the right one that had borne the deepest mark from the handcuffs, the welt that had taken 3 weeks to fully fade. She held it now, the way she had held it in the hospital 14 years ago when he was recovering from surgery, and the way she had held it at the town hall when he walked off the stage, and the way she had held it every night for 6 months since the night she ran to the front door when she heard voices on the street. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You know that. You've mentioned it. I'll keep mentioning it." She looked at him steadily. "You could have been bitter. You had every right. Instead, you went out there and said exactly what needed to be said in exactly the way it needed to be said, and the people who needed to hear it heard it." He was quiet for a moment. The street below was still and warm and beautiful, the jasmine drifting from Eleanor's garden 3 doors down, the oak trees holding the light the way they always had. "They tried to make me feel like I didn't belong here," he said finally. The thing he had not said at the press conference or the town hall or in any of the interviews or the legal proceedings or the conversations with Darius about the lawsuit. The thing he had been carrying precisely because he understood what carrying it meant and what it would cost him if he put it down wrong. 50 feet from my own front door, with 35 years of memories inside that house and 26 years of property taxes paid, and every neighbor on this block knowing my name, and they made me stand there with my hands raised, and they put metal on my wrists, and they laughed. He paused. They wanted me to feel small. Diane held his hand and did not try to fill the silence. Instead, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not triumph, but was not far from it. Something quiet and grounded and completely certain of itself. They made me loud. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together on the porch under the light that had been burning for them through everything. And the street below was quiet and safe, and full of the particular beauty of a summer night, in a neighborhood where people know each other and look out for each other and show up when it matters. Inside the house on the television, the anchor was still talking about the web protocol, the training, the oversight, the consequences, the change that had come out of one wrong night on one quiet street. And somewhere in the city, on a street just like this one, another person was walking home. Sometimes the worst night of your life is the night the world finally starts to listen. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that is exactly enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss what comes next. Stories like this one matter. The people in them matter, and so do you.